My name is Leena Patel. I'm 35, born and raised just outside Detroit, the daughter of two immigrants who believed in hard work, quiet dignity, and never leaving a mess behind. I now live in Chicago, where I worked as head of financial strategy for a growing tech firm until the day I was told to pack my things. I never expected to be in this position. I played by the rules, exceeded every metric, stayed late, took notes, mentored junior analysts, and believed deeply in fairness even when it came slowly. I didn't raise my voice often, but when I did, it was to defend what I knew to be right. The moment I found myself sitting across from my boss with a resignation letter pushed toward me, everything I'd built felt like it was about to collapse. Not because I had failed, but because I had noticed something I wasn't supposed to. And I didn't stay silent. That choice to speak up when it would have been easier not to changed everything. I share this not for sympathy, but because I know what it feels like to be pressured into silence. I know how it burns quietly when the truth you carry is treated like an inconvenience. And I know what it's like to feel that if you stand up, you'll lose everything you've worked for. But I also know this. There are moments in life when one decision defines more than just your career. It defines who you are when no one's watching. This story isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming something that was never supposed to be negotiable: your worth, your voice, and your place in the room. You don't have to be loud to fight back. Sometimes all it takes is paying attention, being ready, and refusing to look away. That's what I did, and that's why I'm still standing here to tell you what happened next. The message came through as a sudden calendar update. No subject, no details, just a room number and a time 30 minutes from when I saw it. I already knew what it meant. The tension in the office had been mounting, subtle, but thick, like smoke before fire. I walked to the meeting with my pulse pounding in my ears. He was already sitting there when I arrived, eyes cold, a single sheet of paper on the table between us. He didn't waste time. His words landed like a blow. Sign this or forget ever working in finance again. I froze for a second, not from surprise, but from the sheer weight of the moment I'd anticipated, but never truly rehearsed for. The document looked like a standard resignation letter, brief and clinical. My name was printed neatly, the words, "Voluntary resignation," sitting squarely in the center, like a trap disguised as a gift. I thought of the late nights, the projects no one else wanted, the moments I'd spoken up because no one else would. And this was the price. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The walls of the conference room felt like they were closing in the air, too thin to hold all the things I wanted to say. My fingers hovered over the pen, and I could feel his eyes watching me, already celebrating the win. But inside, something shifted. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I just picked up the pen, signed my name, and as he stepped away to take a call, I pulled the page slightly toward me. I crossed out the phrase "voluntary resignation," and in the margin, I wrote "constructive dismissal due to hostile work environment." My handwriting was calm, precise. I added the date and time, then I placed the pen back exactly where I'd found it. When he returned, he took the paper without a glance, satisfied, told me to clean out my desk by the end of the day. I nodded, stood and walked out without looking back. My heart was racing, but my steps were steady. In the restroom down the hall, I locked the stall, pulled out my phone and took a photo of the document. I emailed it to my attorney and copied in HR. Then, I just sat there, hands shaking, staring at the wall. That was the moment everything began to shift, not because he had threatened me, but because I didn't let him finish the story on his terms. At first, it was easy to dismiss. A meeting I usually attended no longer had my name on the invite. Then a group thread moved forward without my input, and no one seemed to notice. I told myself it was an oversight, maybe a scheduling shift I missed, but something didn't feel right. My name disappeared from the footer of a budget proposal I had written. When I asked about it, my boss said it had been a formatting issue, nothing intentional. But that same document was later praised in a leadership meeting with full credit given to a colleague who had joined the team 3 months earlier. Other things followed, small on the surface, but strangely consistent. I'd show up to presentations and find out the agenda had changed. I'd mention ideas in team huddles, only to hear them repeated later by someone else now labeled as theirs. At first, I felt like I was losing track, maybe overreacting. But the pattern grew harder to ignore. Colleagues who once looped me in began offering half smiles and quick goodbyes instead of real conversation. I was told my reports needed more clarity, while others with less detail were approved immediately. Still, I told myself this wasn't deliberate. Maybe I was being sensitive, only the feeling wouldn't go away. It was like being slowly erased in real time, but no one around me seemed to notice. Or worse, they noticed and didn't say anything. I started keeping notes, not because I had a plan, but because I needed to know I wasn't imagining it. Some part of me was still trying to prove this wasn't personal, but deep down I knew better. It started with a number that didn't sit right. A small transfer between two departments that lacked a proper approval code. I almost brushed it off, assuming someone had simply forgotten to update the record, but something about it kept nagging at me. The amount was minor, easily overlooked in a quarterly report, but the memo field was blank. I ran a search through past reports looking for similar entries and found 3 more within the last 2 cycles. Each one shared the same odd signature, missing codes, vague justifications, and timing that matched up with internal reorganization dates. I expanded the search. Patterns began to emerge. The same departments. The same obscure vendor names. I cross-checked those vendors and found addresses that led to shell corporations, some registered in other states. And the common link, all transactions were authorized shortly after my supervisor took control of our unit. My pulse quickened. This wasn't an accident, it was a system. Each irregularity was small, designed not to trigger alarms. But strung together, they formed a web that pointed in one direction, toward him. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how carefully it had been built. Budget reallocations masked as performance bonuses. Contract overpricing that funneled funds to related entities. It was all tucked between the lines of reports meant to be read quickly and signed off faster. I printed everything and marked each anomaly in red. My notes grew thicker, my folders heavier. I wasn't sure what I would do yet, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't a mistake, and if I kept digging, I would find exactly what he didn't want anyone to see. The shift was quiet at first, almost unspoken. My project assignments dried up, replaced with administrative tasks that didn't require my background or experience. When I logged in one Monday, my access to 3 of our key databases had been revoked, flagged under a vague security update I hadn't been told about. No one mentioned it directly, but the message was clear. I was being boxed out step by step. Meetings moved without me. Dashboards I'd built were suddenly managed by others, and when I asked questions, I was met with deflections. My desk was relocated to a remote corner near the server room where the hum of equipment made even phone calls difficult. At lunch, I sat alone. The silence from people I once mentored spoke volumes. I wasn't just being sidelined. I was being erased. And I knew what came next. This was the company's playbook for pushing someone out without leaving fingerprints. I didn't argue. I documented. I started forwarding key emails to my personal account. I saved screenshots, organized timelines, and wrote everything down. Dates, names, what was said and what wasn't. I responded to every vague criticism with facts, making sure every reply was professional but pointed. In the evenings I studied employment law, whistleblower protections, and case studies on constructive dismissal. I filled notebooks with definitions, legal precedents, and HR protocols. I installed a secure recording app on my phone and carried it with me everywhere. I didn't know exactly when they'd make their final move, but I intended to be ready when they did. It wasn't anger that kept me focused. It was clarity. The kind that settles in when you stop trying to win someone's approval and start preparing to defend your truth. They wanted me gone quietly. I had no intention of leaving without a record of how it happened. The final blow came dressed as opportunity. I had spent weeks building a procurement analysis model that had saved the company nearly $500,000. Senior leadership loved it, and I was told I'd be presenting it at the next board meeting. But 2 days before the presentation, an email quietly reassigned it to someone else. No explanation, just a subject line that said, "Update. on Thursday's agenda. I asked why, and my manager replied with a calm tone that masked the intent. He said it was due to concerns about my attitude and collaboration style. I asked for specifics names, something I could address. He gave none. Just said that several colleagues had raised concerns, and I should reflect on my recent behavior. That word, behavior, was the most carefully placed trap of all. That evening, I met with Danielle, a friend of a friend who practiced employment law. We sat across from each other at a quiet coffee shop while I laid everything out. Emails, printouts, audio clips, even screenshots of team calendars. She flipped through them silently, her eyes sharp behind thick-rimmed glasses. When she looked up, her voice was steady. This is a textbook case. Hostile environment, targeted demotion, constructive dismissal. She told me they were building a case against me, so I'd walk away first and quietly. She didn't tell me to quit. She told me to keep collecting, to keep smiling, keep performing, and keep my hands clean. If they wanted to force me out, I would let them try. But not without a record of every step they took to get there. I refined my system. Every file had a date. Every conversation was documented. I wrote outlines of every performance review and saved every file with triple backups. I studied the company's standard resignation templates and learned where the legal traps were hidden. I didn't know when it would come, but I knew it would. And when it did, I wouldn't flinch. I would be ready. The meeting appeared on my calendar without warning. Just a room number and my manager's name. No agenda, no subject line. My chest tightened. I knew what it meant. The trap had been set and I was expected to walk into it and close the door behind me. He was already seated when I arrived. A single sheet of paper sat on the glass table, its edges perfectly aligned. His smile was thin, rehearsed. He gestured to the chair across from him and said we should make this clean and professional. He slid the letter across the table like a final move in a game he believed he had already won. I picked up the paper. At the top, in bold, was the phrase voluntary resignation. I let my eyes scan the lines, though I already knew what it would say. I was leaving the company of my own accord. I was doing so with appreciation for my time and colleagues. And I was waiving any claim of wrongdoing. It was a script written for silence. He waited, saying nothing. I could feel his confidence radiating across the table. In his mind, it was over. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was done waiting to be saved by someone else. I had done the work. I knew the law, and I knew exactly how much power lived inside the smallest change. I picked up the pen without hesitation. I signed my name. Then, just below the line that read, voluntary resignation, I drew a single line through the phrase. Above it, in steady handwriting, I wrote constructive dismissal due to a hostile work environment. I dated it. I noted the time. Then I placed the pen down and folded my hands. He stepped out to take a call before collecting the form. Didn't even look at it. Just slid it into a folder and told me I'd be escorted out by the end of the day. His voice carried that same cool authority I used to second guess. But not anymore. I nodded. Calm, polite, unaffected. I walked straight to the restroom, locked myself in a stall, and pulled out my phone. I photographed the form and sent it to Danielle, my attorney, and copied HR. I added a short message. The meeting just ended. It's done. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the release of something I'd carried for too long. The weight of knowing. The pressure of waiting. The strain of holding on when everything around you wants you to let go. And in one word, dismissal instead of resignation, I had turned the whole thing on its head. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need a confrontation. All I needed was one clear sentence in a space where silence was expected. One word written in ink that said I saw everything, and I wouldn't be erased. 2 days after I sent the letter, my phone rang at 7:18 a.m. It was HR. Their tone was measured, almost careful. They asked me to return to the office for a meeting with senior leadership, and I agreed, letting them know my attorney would be joining. When I walked back into the building, it felt different. Not just to me, but to everyone who saw me. People who once looked away now nodded. One whispered that they had been meaning to say something for a while. Another just gave me a look I couldn't quite name. Maybe relief, Maybe respect. The meeting was in one of the top-floor conference rooms, the kind used only for board presentations and major deals. My attorney sat beside me, calm and ready. Across the table were faces that had once seemed distant, almost untouchable. But today, they looked uncertain. They had seen what I documented. They had read every word. As we spoke, I watched the shift happen in real time. HR confirmed they had received additional complaints from other employees. Quietly, people were beginning to speak up. Not just about harassment, but about the way fear had been used as a management strategy. The stories were different, but the shape of them felt familiar. The investigation was already underway. Data access had been locked and vendor records flagged. My manager, no longer addressed by title, had been placed on administrative leave. It wasn't said with drama, just a statement of fact. Like gravity. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. I was back in the same building, but not the same person. This time, I wasn't there to survive. I was there to lead with the truth I had refused to bury. The silence that once pressed against me had cracked. And in its place, a space was opening. One where people could finally breathe. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Within 2 weeks, external auditors had uncovered a pattern of kickbacks tied to vendor contracts. Over $1.4 million had been funneled through inflated invoices and redirected to shell companies linked to my former manager. What had once looked like isolated mistakes now formed a blueprint for manipulation. The system hadn't just failed, it had been used. Internal checks were ignored, sign-offs had been forged, and bonuses were quietly tied to budget shifts no one questioned, until someone did. The fallout was immediate. A company-wide meeting was called, and for the first time in years, the leadership spoke with something close to humility. The CEO acknowledged the failures and accepted responsibility. Policies were rewritten. An anonymous reporting platform was launched, with safeguards to ensure follow-through. Mandatory ethics training was scheduled across every department. The man who tried to push me out was formally terminated. Not quietly, not behind closed doors, but with an internal notice that named the violations and cited the investigation findings. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like gravity doing its job. No one cheered, but the silence was different now. Not the silence of fear or complicity. It was the sound of something breaking open. An old rhythm was interrupted, a culture forced to look at itself and this time not look away. I didn't need a podium. I didn't need applause. The truth had done what it was meant to do. It had found its way into the light. And once it was there, the damage spoke for itself. Hoy ChatGPT. 3 months after the investigation closed, I received a message from the CEO's office. They were creating a new role, Director of Ethics and Compliance, and they wanted me to consider it. The offer came with autonomy, direct reporting to the board, and a mandate to build what hadn't existed before. I took a weekend to think. Not out of hesitation, but to make sure I would do it for the right reasons. I wasn't interested in a title or a clean narrative. I was interested in change. Real structural change. The kind that doesn't come with a press release but with accountability that sticks long after the crisis fades. I accepted. On my first day, I walked into my new office carrying only a folder of handwritten notes and a simple idea: silence protects no one. I met with teams across departments, listened without judgment, and asked them what safety would look like if it were more than just a promise. Their answers became the blueprint. We created an anonymous reporting portal with guaranteed follow-up protocols. We redesigned onboarding to include real examples of ethical courage. I introduced regular roundtables where concerns could be raised without hierarchy. It wasn't perfect, but it was something honest. And that mattered. One evening as I closed my laptop, my phone buzzed. The message was short. "You ruined me. Hope you're satisfied." It was from him, my former manager. His trial was scheduled for the following week. I read it once, then deleted it without replying. There was nothing left to say. He hadn't understood. This was never about revenge. It was about refusing to let fear write the ending. A few days later, I gave a talk at the company's annual meeting. I spoke about integrity, about small choices, and about the cost of silence. I shared something my father once told me as he fixed an old radio in our garage. The smallest wires cause the biggest failures. Fixing them doesn't just restore function. Sometimes it rewires everything. That line stayed with me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't designed to impress. But it was true. What unraveled the deception wasn't a grand moment. It was the act of noticing, of writing down, of refusing to be erased by convenience or fear. So now I'll ask you, have you ever faced a moment where changing one word, asking one question, or making one small decision shifted everything around you? Or maybe you're standing at that threshold now, unsure of what will happen if you speak. If you are, I hope this story reminds you that power doesn't only belong to those in charge. It also lives in those who refuse to disappear.